Hey there, guys. For our Marveling at Monsters collaboration project, we chose Edmund Kemper. He's a very famous serial killer. His nickname is Co-Ed Killer. That's crazy to me. For the presenters in order for this project will be Haley, Carlos, me, and Amon. Our stance on Edmund Kemper is that he is a very fascinating man with a very long, complicated story to tell, who committed sickening and disturbing crimes time after time, while according to him, living in two different worlds. He started these crimes while when he was less than 15 years old. That is crazy. I don't understand how somebody could commit these crimes at less than 15 years old. I think he was 15 years old. That's very, very crazy.
He first showed signs of violence through his cruelty to animals. When he was just 10 years old, he buried the pet cat alive. After this, he dug it back up, decapitated it, and then put its head on a spike. He later said that he found great joy in being able to not only kill the cat, but also successfully lie to his family about it. 3 years later, he killed the next pet cat once again because he believed that it was favoring his younger sister over him and he was resentful. He did not, however, successfully hide this from his mother, as she found pieces of it in his closet. Edmund was known for having a dark fantasy life as a young kid, and he would remove the head and hands off of his sister's dolls, and his older sister even recalls a time when she teased him and asked why he wouldn't kiss his teacher, who he had presumably had a crush on, and his reply was that if he was going to kiss the teacher, he was going to have to kill her first. He would also sneak out of his home with his father's bayonet and watch and stalk his second-grade teacher in her home. His favorite games to play as a child were gas chamber and electric chair, in which he would have his sisters flip the switch and he would pretend to die as a result of both of these methods. He was very close with his father as a child, and it was very hard on him when his parents had decided to separate and get a divorce. He, however, had a horrible relationship with his mother, who was a neurotic alcoholic who was constantly undermining him. She would often force him to sleep in the basement and lock him in there because she feared that he would hurt his sisters, although she didn't have any evidence of this. It's believed that she probably thought that he was violent because of the cat, but this was happening before he even exhibited those signs of violence. She just didn't like Edmund. She constantly mocked him for his height and would call him names, and she decided to withhold affection from him completely because she said, and I quote, that it would turn him gay if she showed him any affection whatsoever. She would tell him that he was just like his father and that no one would ever love him. It's speculated that she was suffering from BPD, which is borderline personality disorder, which could explain why she acted the way that she did. Once he was 14 years old, he ran away to Van Nuys to be with his father, but to his surprise, he had found that his father was already now remarried and had a stepson, and it's believed that this was really hard on him, and he shortly left and was sent to go live with his paternal grandparents in Norfolk, California. He said that he hated living there and is quoted saying that his grandfather was senile and that his grandmother constantly emasculated him and his grandfather. On August 24th, 1964, when he was only 15 years old, this is when he was going to enact his first murders. So Kemper was constantly arguing with his grandmother, and in this particular moment, they were in the kitchen, and Kemper got into an argument with his grandmother at the kitchen table. In a fit of rage, he stormed off and grabbed a rifle that earlier his grandfather had gotten him to use for hunting. However, his rifle had been confiscated because him and his grandfather would go hunting, but he would needlessly shoot animals as well, just for fun. And that went against everything that his grandfather and his grandmother believed in, so they took away his rifle. He took it back, and when he came back to the kitchen, he fatally shot his grandmother in the head and then twice more in the back. Some accounts report that there were multiple post-mortem stab wounds as well, and her last words were You better not be shooting those birds again. When his grandfather came home from grocery shopping, Kemper fatally shot him in the driveway next to his car, and he didn't know what to do next, so he called his mother and she told him to contact the police. After he was arrested, he was quoted saying, "I just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma." He testified that he killed his grandfather so that he wouldn't find out that his wife had died and be upset with him. The crimes were deemed unfathomable for a 15-year-old to do, and he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He was then sent to the Atascadero State Hospital, which is a maximum security facility that houses mentally ill convicts.
So, when Edmund Kemper was released from the state hospital after the initial murders of his grandparents, he was, well, first, in the state hospital, he was viewed as a model prisoner. He was trained to administer psychiatric tests to the other mentally ill prisoners. And in this hospital, he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, during his time there, he, being able to communicate with the other prisoners, he learned from sex offenders that if you were going to commit a violent crime, sexual violent crime, such as rape, that it's best to kill the victim. That way, you can get away with it. This is something that stuck with Kemper for basically until he got out, when he was 21 years old. So when he got out, against the wishes of the psychiatrist in the state hospital, they said that he was not deemed fit to be reintegrated into society, but the judge thought otherwise, and he was placed under the care of his mother. Now, as previously stated by Haley, she said that Kemper and his mother did not have a very good relationship, and it didn't change. It became worse, tempers flared, and things just kind of got progressively worse with him being around his mother so much. Initially, he thought, I'd like to be a police officer. He always had like an infatuation with that, and he wanted to become a police, try to turn his life around. Unfortunately, due to his stature, he's 6'9", 300 pounds. He was not accepted into the police academy. They said he was too big, but he still wanted to be around the police, and he made friends with the police. He would go to this local police bar called Jury Room. There, he would frequent, and he would just, try to get to know some of the police officers. Everyone, learned to, everyone got to know him, learned about him a little bit, but no one knew that he previously murdered his grandparents. His juvenile record was expunged, so if there was no record, nothing to be traced saying that, he did commit those murders when he was 15 years old. The local police department kind of described him as a friendly nuisance. He was very curious and, just wanting to be in the mix, sort of thing. When he began committing his crimes, there was a progression. He first would pick up hitchhikers. Hitchhiking was very prevalent in the 1970s, and being around a large university, there was plenty of hitchhikers. So he would drive around looking for potential victims before knowing that they were potential victims. So he would pick them up, take them to their destination, and leave it at that. But soon he began to realize that he felt these urges. In his words, he called them zappies, where he would feel sexual urges and violent urges at the same time on his body. His genitals. He would say that he felt the zappies when he was getting ready to pick somebody up. When he finally does get prepared enough to pick up a potential victim and go through with a more violent ending, he starts to prepare. He starts putting rope in his car, plastic bags, handcuffs. He got handcuffs, and that's when it really begins. He states in his own words that when he would argue with his mother, these urges for violent sexual tendencies were more prevalent, they were harder to resist. So he began his murder spree with 2 young women in May 1972, and he murdered six college students over the course of 11 months. These crimes were especially heinous. There was the dismemberment, there was the decapitation of the corpses, and then ultimately the sodomization and the necrophilia. Necrophilia being having sex with the corpses. He didn't really take the initial advice that the sex offenders in the mental hospital were telling him. He did it quite the opposite. Instead of raping the victim and then killing the victim, he would kill the victim and then have sex with the dead body. There's the crimes that he committed to these women. He was using those women as a vessel to get courageous enough to finally commit his final 2 murders, which were the murders of his mother and the murders of his mother's best friend. When he committed those 2 murders, he immediately took off. He left a note for the police, and he drove 18 hours straight, about 1,000 miles to Colorado, where he was anticipating a manhunt. He had multiple weapons in his car with lots of ammunition, anticipating a huge FBI manhunt. But to his surprise, nobody believed that he committed these crimes. He called the police, and he confessed, and they just, they knew who he was, Big Ed, Gentle Ed, and they didn't believe him at first. So he waited a few hours, and he called back, and then he stated, no, I did commit these murders, and the bodies are here. Should I just wait for you guys to come pick me up? And that's what he did. He turned himself in. He waited. There was no struggle. He was arrested, and at the trial, he said the reason why he committed the murders were because he wanted to have them as his possessions. So that's like something that is common with serial killers. It's the power, the high, the adrenaline from having the power over somebody. And like other serial killers, he kept trophies. In this case, one of the victims that he had murdered, he decapitated, and he placed her head facing his mother's window. Now, the reason behind that is because it's pretty morbid. He said that his mother always wanted to be looked up to, so he was obliging her wishes. And learning about this specific crime and reasoning behind the crimes is pretty, it's pretty sickening. It was really tough to just read, and even listening to him speak about it, because he was very vocal. Once he was in prison, he was like a celebrity. Journalists wanted to talk to him. The FBI wanted to talk to him because he was very vocal about his crimes and the reasonings behind them. And it was insight to the mind of a serial killer. So his calmness, the fact that he was just so relaxed, describing everything, it was interesting and fascinating at the same time for the psychology of it. And Amon is actually going to go ahead and highlight the psychology of these crimes, so you'll go ahead and see him next.
Well, as you guys all know by now, Ed Kemper, nickname was Co-Ed Killer, which he was one of the most famous, if not the famous, serial killers in the entire world, at the very minimum, USA. But from this section of the presentation, I will be talking about Kemper's prison life. Kemper developed a friendly relationship with his psychiatrist, who eventually made the teenager his assistant. But despite his apparently adaptation to the facility, several psychologists did not believe that Kemper was ready for release back into the world, since he was still really crazy and he was just having all these psycho thoughts. It was just crazy times. But nevertheless, on December 18th, 1969, his 21st birthday, Kemper was released from the facility with his mother. This was before he killed his mother and any of that stuff, like we said previously. But Kemper was massive, with a height of 6'3" and a weight of 228 or 280 pounds. It's no surprise that some people began calling him Big Ed. That was his other nickname. He hated his mother, but he was not ready to kill her just yet. Between 1972 and 1973, Kemper killed 6 female students who were hitchhiking. We already said this previously in the other videos that are in the presentation. But Kemper allegedly said, per the aesthetics of degradation, sorry about that, Kemper made his victims feel safe before killing them in many different ways, including by shooting, stabbing, and strangling. The vicious killer also had sex with their bodies, which he would often decapitate. Whoa, that's crazy. To keep their heads as a trophy. Think about that. He would have sex with their bodies and then decapitate their heads and leave it as a trophy? What? That's crazy. That's on another whole level. On April 1973, he killed his mother while he was sleeping and raped the body. What is wrong with this person? Later, he invited his mother's best friend over and strangled her as well. How does this make sense? Okay. I don't know what somebody's thinking. How do you think this is okay? But later in his life, his prison life, he began helping the FBI to catch other serial killers. During the 1970s, researchers and police didn't know how much their inner workings in the FBI launched a pioneer project that involved visiting prisons to talk to those criminals and understand their minds. I mean, at least he's helping, but he's still a serial killer. At least he's giving something back, but I don't understand how somebody could think that this is okay. I don't know. Kemper was one of them. He was able to provide a lot of insights as to who these offenders commit these crimes, who the offenders were that committed these crimes. FBI agents were able to identify some common characteristics and backgrounds among serial killers we normally would not have known. said Brian Fox, a former FBI agent and researcher at the Bureau's Behavioral Science Unit. So he just helped a lot. He gave back. I guess he gave back. He just told the FBI what like wanted to know and like how to help track other serial killers, just like Big Ed, which his nickname is. But he was a very violent person. It's just so crazy how this could happen in America. I just hope this never happens again. This is such a big tragedy. Like, I don't really think anybody knew this was like going on in the 1970s. It was just so crazy. Like, I don't know how somebody can live with themselves after committing these horrible acts, and like, I just don't understand it. But I mean, at least hopefully he's gone now and he's not doing this anymore. I believe he has a life sentence in prison as of lately. But yes, it is confirmed that he has a life sentence. So, see you in the next part.
So Edmund Kemper was basically the textbook definition of a serial killer, psychopathic tendencies early on in life, and he was also very intelligent. It was found that he had a very high IQ after he was caught by police after murdering his grandparents, which were the first two people he killed. He originally killed his grandmother because he wanted to know how it felt, and he killed his grandfather as a weird, twisted mercy kill so that he wouldn't have to live with the fact that his wife was now dead. They took him in, they tested him psychologically, and they figured, oh, he has a high IQ, but they were like, oh, he probably has paranoid schizophrenia, was what they diagnosed him with. They couldn't believe that a 15-year-old could do such horrible acts, basically. And then, he went on to kill another 6 young women, college girls, and he killed his mother as well, and her friend, a total of 10 people in his entire life. And so the reasons behind his murders, he revealed them in a 1984 interview. It was used in the documentary, Murder, No Apparent Motive. At the beginning of the interview, he states, I'm not an expert, I'm not an authority, I'm someone who has been a murderer for almost 20 years. He talks about it as if it's like a profession, essentially. And he lived as an ordinary person for most of his life, is what he said. But that his descent into madness, it can be tied back to the abuse that he always received from his mother. He would be locked in a cellar, he was degraded by her. He said his mother was a very sick and angry, a hungry, and a very sad woman, and that he hated her, but he wished that he could love her. And the frustration that she caused him all throughout his life, that was actually his reason for murdering those 6 girls that he picked up hitchhiking. And, he even stated one time he locked himself out of his car, and one of the girls actually helped him get back in, and that was one of his victims. And he said, I brought this up to show you how awful that these rages in my head got. Even someone helping me, I had to murder them. He felt like this urge was uncontrollable. He said there was incredible energies in his mind, positive and negative, depending on his mood. And actually, the reason he started picking up the girls who were hitchhiking, it also ties back to one of his reasons for killing them. He's unable to communicate to hold a relationship, especially a male-female relationship, and that it was said that essentially it would take more courage for him to build a relationship and maintain it than it would to just kill a person, essentially. It was said that he was more scared of losing a relationship than he was of, taking a life, basically. And actually, originally, he would just pick up these passengers, take them to wherever they needed to go. There wouldn't be any weapons in the car. He would go to, even in areas where there was no people, he would have this urge, do I murder them? Do I kill them? Do I harm them? Something like that, but he would never do it. Eventually, he started playing a game with himself. He brought his gun into his car, and he would hold it there under his leg. He would keep it concealed, and he played a game, basically. It was, Do I bring it out or do I not? If I bring it out, something has to happen. Something has to happen if he brings it out. He can't just bring it out and be like, oh, now it's out. Now it has to happen. That's what he said. That was his mindset, essentially. And so the first two murders, after his grandparents, the first two hitchhiking murders, there were two girls. There was, I can't pronounce her last name properly, but Pesca, I think, and Lucessa. And so originally he stabbed Pesca in the woods. He took her out of the car and he tied up Lucessa, and he went to stab Pesca in the woods. And then he came back to the car, and he said he was in shock after murdering the first one. But he figured he needs to kill Lucessa now because, in his words, I can't let her go. She's going to tell on me. Everybody's going to get me. And it's like he's trying to justify the reason for not letting her go, for murdering her, in a way. And, he lied to Lucessa about what he'd done. He said he broke Pesca's nose because she got smart with him. It was to scare her. Like, oh, if you don't cooperate, I'll use violence. And he said if she doesn't have to know she's going to die. She's going to die anyways. Why does she have to know the truth about it, basically? And, it was like he lives in two realities, basically. There was a normal reality that he showed everyone, and then there was the psychopathic one, the one where he would murder people. He would live in two realities, and he was fully self-aware of this, which is what made him able to get away with everything he did, because he was fully aware of what he was doing and where the division between those two realities was. And, the reasons behind the next four murders, they didn't really change at all. They were actually, again, just based off of frustrations he had throughout his life. He actually publicly stated that his mother was the one he had been killing all along, essentially. He connected these girls to his mother. And that once he had actually murdered his mother, like, herself, once she was gone, that would be the end of it, essentially. He had no reason to go on. And so actually a week before he killed her, he picked up another two college girls. They wanted to get dropped off to their college, and he fully suppressed the urge to do anything. He dropped them off, and he realized that as long as his mother is alive, his frustrations would still be there, and his urges to murder would still be there. And so that day, 1 week before the murder of his mother, he decided she was going to die. So he actually blamed the six girls he killed, their deaths. He blamed them on his mother. He even stated 6 young women dead because of the way she, his mother, raises her son, and because of the way he grew up. So he being himself. And actually, his mother's final words were, "I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk." And Kemper did say that he wished he did. And in the end, essentially, this monster that was created, Edmund Kemper, he became this monster because his mother was a monster as well. And he knew nothing else other than pain and frustration, essentially. So he even saw his victims as people, not just, humans or things that are just dead now. He saw them as individual people, not just living beings. They had their own lives, personalities. He said maybe had his mother had his mother raised him properly, maybe those 6 people would still be alive. And hell, maybe even he would have had a normal life. He might have been married, had children. Nothing would have happened. And, can't really justify what he did. Of course not. Never will. Nothing ever will. But he might be right. His upbringing broke him, essentially. His entire mind was all over the place. He had no concept of normality or normalcy, essentially. So it can be hypothesized. We'll never know, obviously. It can be hypothesized, maybe, just maybe, none of it would have happened if the first monsters weren't there to build this new one.